Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Webb. I'm a Senior Manager in General Qualifications at Ofqual. As Rena said, my colleague Bethany Hughes is also on the call. Bethany is a Senior Manager in Vocational and Technical Qualifications. And between us, we're just going to take you through the exceptional grading and awarding arrangements in place for regulated qualifications this summer. So we thought it might be helpful just to start with a bit of a timeline as background. So on 18th of March this year, DfE confirmed that GCSEs, AS and A-level exams would be cancelled. On the 31st of March, the Secretary of State gave a direction to Ofqual to work with exam boards to deliver calculated grades, with the purpose of enabling as many students as possible to progress to the next stage of their lives, whether that's education or employment. And that was followed on the 9th of April by another direction about arrangements for assessments of vocational and technical qualifications and other qualifications that weren't covered by the original direction. So we held two public consultations. So first of all, in April, a consultation on the approach to grading and awarding of GCSEs, AS and A-levels, also extended project qualifications and advanced extension awards in maths. So we had over 12,000 responses to that consultation, including from respondents representing HE. Then on the 24th of April to the 8th of May, we consulted on arrangements for vocational and technical qualifications, and also proposed an extraordinary regulatory framework for those qualifications. Again, we had good engagement, about 1,500 responses. And on the 22nd of May, we confirmed and published our decisions. So we published the analysis of the consultation responses and also our decisions on the approach to calculated grades, and we launched the extraordinary regulatory framework. Okay. So this next slide illustrates the process by which grades are being calculated for GCSEs, AS and A-levels. So you can see it's in two stages. So on the left of the graphic, you see step one. And this is where schools or colleges consider and submit centre assessment grades and rank order information to exam boards. So a centre assessment grade is a holistic professional judgment made by a teacher about the grade they think a student would have got had they sat the exams. So they provide a centre assessment grade for each student for each subject. And teachers know their students and are best placed to provide this information. And as you can see there, the judgment takes into account a range of evidence. So it's not just based on marks or coursework. The teachers, in our guidance, we said that teachers should take a holistic view and look across the range of available evidence. So having made a judgment on a centre assessment grade, teachers then ranked students within grades. So that's to say, within a grade, they would rank from strongest to weakest performing students in that grade. And we provided guidance to centres to help them in this, in these judgments. Exam boards also work closely with centres just to help them with the process. And our guidance included guidance on how to make objective decisions and judgments. So centres were required to pass this information to the exam boards by the 12th of June. So step one is now complete. And if you move over to the right, so step two, this is now in progress. So step two is the process whereby exam boards standardise grades using a statistical model developed with Ofqual. So the statistical model will take into account previous national results in the subject, the prior attainment of the centre's students this year compared to previous years, and also the school or college results in recent years. So prior attainment, you may be aware, but just to clarify, so for GCSE grading, that looks back to Key Stage 2 data, and for A-level grading, it looks at GCSE data. So standardisation is important because it ensures the same standard is applied across schools and colleges. Because of the speed at which all this was put in place, it wasn't possible to provide national training on standardising judgments. So it is likely that centres will see some adjustments to their centre assessment grades in order to bring them into line with other schools and colleges. And such adjustments are in the interest of fairness to students overall. So if you look on the sort of bottom right, this just explains, you know, if a particular centre has awarded grades that are very generous, it's possible that some of those grades may be adjusted down. But if, on the other hand, if a centre has been severe in its grading, then grades may be adjusted upwards. I thought it was just worth clarifying, because there has been some press around this. There's no blanket downgrading of students' grades by a third, as was suggested in some online petitions that were reported in the press. So there's no blanket downgrading, but there is this important standardisation process that brings consistency. So results, a bit of an overlap with some of the information Andy was just talking through. So AS and A-level results will be released on the 13th of August, GCSEs 20th of August. So those, no change there, those were the originally scheduled dates. So HE can have confidence in these results. So we've just talked about standardisation. The results that will be released will have been standardised to make sure the same standard is applied across different schools and colleges. And some results that centres have submitted may have been adjusted. There'll be broadly stable outcomes at national level when compared to previous years. And we expect this year's results to be fair to different groups of students. And we will share information about the impact of this year's approach on different groups, including those that share particular protected characteristics. And it is our intention to to publish more detailed information about the statistical model in due course. So for your purposes, you can be confident that this year's results carry the same currency as those in previous and future years. So students will receive a single result for each subject in the normal way. Schools and colleges are, though, considering whether to be open as normal, which might affect the precise way in which students receive them. So whether they will be attending school or college in person, or receiving those results virtually is not yet clear. And though we plan to support understanding of this year's arrangements, some students, of course, may still have questions about how their results were determined. And this will be for the centre and the exam board to address. After results are released, students have the right to find out the grade that their school or college submitted to the exam board to be standardised. So the framework we've put in place means that that information cannot be shared with students before results, but it can be requested by students once results have been released through subject access requests. So we just thought it was helpful for you to be aware of that in case you know, students may share that information with you as well as their calculated grade. So the centre assessment grade and ranking information could be different from the final results they receive, and it doesn't affect the final result. So the calculated grade is the final grade that the student's been awarded. Private candidates, so again, Andy, you touched on this. So you will have, you may have some applicants who are private candidates, and these are students who haven't been studying in a centre, could be resitters, home educated, or need a particular qualification to access an HE course. So our guidance allowed centres to include private candidates in their centre assessment grades and ranking information only where they were confident they had seen sufficient evidence to make an objective judgment. So exam boards published additional guidance about the evidence centres might use to make judgments on private candidates, and also permitting private candidates to transfer to centres that would be able to work with them. So the window for centre assessment grades and ranking information to be submitted to exam boards closed on the 12th of June. Now, some private candidates were accepted by centres by that date and will be able to receive a calculated grade, but it is the case that others will not. So these students can sit exams in the autumn or in 2021, but may be seeking entry to HE before receiving these results. So what does this mean for your admissions decisions? Well, first to say, of course, admissions is a matter for higher education providers acting in line with the OFS framework, and we know the sort of exceptional temporary condition that's been put in place. But higher education providers, sort of our message is that you should treat 2020 results as having exactly the same currency as in previous years, and the grades awarded are likely to remain the key piece of evidence in your admissions decisions. However, you may wish to consider some flexibility for certain students in admissions decisions in light of the fact that students didn't take exams. So just as examples, where a student might have missed one grade, you might look more closely at the profile of their grades and not focus so much on that one missed grade. You might consider giving slightly more weight than in other years to other robust evidence, so for example, entry tests of some sort. And you might also want to consider what other evidence could be considered to allow private candidates who couldn't receive a calculated grade to progress. So these are not exhaustive, these are just some examples. This is not intended to be exhaustive, and neither is this intended to undermine the message that you can have confidence in the results, you can rely on this year's results. This is just an acknowledgement that the students this year have not had the opportunity to sit exams. And therefore it is possible that individual students may have performed better or indeed worse in the exams had they taken them. So that's what we're saying here. And hopefully that's helpful. Appeals. So under this year's arrangements, appeals may be brought by centres on grounds of data errors. So that includes errors in the data that centre passed the exam boards, or data errors in the exam board standardisation process or communication of results. So really in the sort of handling. So there's no substantive right of appeal against the centre assessment grade or ranking judgment that schools have made, or against the standardisation model if it was correctly applied. And the thinking around centre assessment grades is really there isn't a suitable other independent person who could consider an appeal against the decision the teacher has made. And also, any change to the student's rank order has an impact for other students. Students who might be concerned about bias in their centre's judgment may raise that as a complaint, so a slightly different route. And there is potential for this to be investigated by the exam boards as malpractice or maladministration. We've confirmed that a change in centre demographic could be in scope of a data error. This is something, when we published our decisions, we were giving more consideration to whether there should be a separate ground of appeal where a cohort has significantly changed in a centre. Our conclusion is that it may be within the scope of a data error, therefore for which there is already a right of appeal. And we're consulting currently on guidance to support exam boards' approach to appeals. So that consultation is open at the moment. The exam boards are considering their timelines for appeals, so I can't confirm today what those are. They will want to ensure, as far as possible, appeals can be concluded in time for autumn entry. But just to flag, it may not always be possible for complex cases. So we think particularly where there are issues around bias that need to be investigated, that there could be complex cases that might take a period of time to conclude. So the autumn exams, again, Andy, you mentioned this. So any student who was entered for summer exams may enter exams in the autumn. And we expect private candidates who couldn't receive a grade and anyone who wishes to improve one or more grades may enter. These are first sits, not resits. And what we're hearing from HE is that it's important that we make that distinction, because I think for some admissions decisions that matters. So these are first sits. Exam boards are required to offer a full suite of exams. Exams are by exam assessment only, no coursework, non-exam assessment, with the exception of art and design. The timing, subject to public health restrictions, we're aiming for A-levels to be held in October, with results released by Christmas, and GCSEs to be held in November, with results released by February. And where requested by students, exam boards are required to provide a certificate showing only the higher of 2 grades. Otherwise, they will just have separate certificates for the 2 summer and for autumn. And usual review of marking moderation and appeal arrangements will apply to the autumn series. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Bethany. Rena, is Bethany enabled as a speaker?
Oh, sorry. Apologies, Bethany. I'll just do that change now. My bad.
Okay.
There we go. Sorry about that, Bethany. There you go.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Rena. Afternoon, everybody. Like Mary, I'm a senior manager in Ofqual, but I reside very much on the Vocational Technical Qualifications Directorate. And as you might imagine, we have done things slightly differently by the nature of these qualifications. So we've developed the Extraordinary Regulatory Framework, as Mary mentioned a little while ago. And this set out principles behind awarding organisations' determination of the permitted approaches to these types of qualifications. And those are calculate, adapt or delay, and I'll come on to those in a bit, and the circumstances when they can be used. We also provide advice to the Secretary of State, setting out our views on which qualifications fall within each category. The Secretary of State then officially determined the list of qualifications that were subject to this framework. So we have a number of qualifications in scope and a number out of scope. And in order to make sure that we were taking account of the users, obviously primarily the learners, but also in terms of the system stability, the providers and awarding organisations, we've been doing a lot of intelligence gathering, carrying out a number of surveys, we've been collecting data, we've got ongoing conversations, and of course we held a consultation slightly earlier in the year, where I know 1,500 responses doesn't sound like very much compared to GQ, but for VTQ I think it's pretty much the total number of responses we've ever had for any consultation all put together. So we were pretty pleased that we got that many. Mary, could you just push on to the next slide, please?
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. So as far as the approach for VTQs goes, we had 3 categories. So the first category, as you can see, very much relates to yourselves and the types of qualifications you might expect to see. In the main, these qualifications will be looking at calculated results, and where those aren't possible, we would expect an adapted assessment to take place. So, for example, you're looking at things like applied generals. One that comes to mind is the BTEC Level 3 National Diploma in Business, for example. This is one that's been confirmed as calculated result. The second category is more of a mixed purpose, so not just directly into FE or HE progression, but could also take somebody onto employment or indeed into an apprenticeship or some other form of progression. So here we expected the awarding organisations to consider what the primary purpose was for these qualifications. Although they may have a mixed market, there is usually one particular reason why this qualification was set up in the first place. So we asked them to consider very carefully what that looked like. And here, as you might imagine, there's a bit of a mixed response. There were some that had calculated results, some that were adapted, and then at the very last resort, we said that we could allow a postponement leading to delayed results. Now, as you can see, functional skills, if you come across these should receive calculated results wherever possible, in line with performance table qualifications. Those with a bit of a mixed purpose include other qualifications on performance table, the government performance tables, usually more the tech levels. So, for example, OCR's Level 3 Cambridge Technical Extended Diploma in IT. This would be a calculated result. In contrast, you've got City and Guilds Level 3 Diploma in Land-Based Technology, also a tech level, also on performance tables, and that's been confirmed as having an adapted assessment. The third category is for those qualifications whose primary purpose is to lead them on into employment. So we'd imagine you'd see fewer of these. And we would expect that the majority of these would likely to be having adapted assessments. Calculated results were often here to be found that there wouldn't be sufficient evidence to have a reliable result. But we would also imagine here that with the more practical subjects, that you can see more delayed qualifications coming in. So, for example, you've got YMCA Level 2 certificate in Foundations of Strength and Conditioning. It's endorsed by CIMSPA, that's the Chartered Institute of Managing Sports Practitioning. I can't remember the last bit. I know them as CIMSPA, but they are the professional body to look after sports practitioners, and that's one of those qualifications where you'd expect to see a delayed assessment because of the type of assessment that it is. It's a very practical competence basis. Thank you. So as far as numbers of qualifications go, we have just over 14,000 qualifications in scope of this framework. 30% of those qualifications, around about, use a calculator results, around 30% for adapted, and then you've got about 10%, which equates to about 1,500 qualifications with delayed. But it's a little different when you start looking at certification numbers. So if you look at the data we've received already from awarding organisations, over 60% of certifications will be arrived at via calculated results approach, over 20% via adapted assessments. You've got a few, around about 3%, that will be assessed as normal. They're very often where there's on-demand and online assessments as standard practice anyway. And we think about 13% of certificates will be delayed this year, which might equate to around about 450 certificates. Probably that's going to be slightly fewer learners. So you quite often, of course, have learners taking more than one qualification, so it's hard to be exact about the number of learners. But overall, we'd expect nearly 9 in 10 certifications this summer will be issued, whether that's through a calculated result or through an adapted version. So Mary, if you can move on. Thank you. So calculated results then. This is similar to our approach to general qualifications. There's a bit of a difference here because in a lot of cases there will be more evidence available, particularly if these qualifications have been unitised and learners have already banked units grades. They will be fed into the overall calculated grade. Teachers will have been assessing learners on a unit basis rather than on a whole grade calculation. So it's similar in that we are relying on teacher judgments as part of it, but there is more evidence available in some cases, and the overall grade obviously is come at a slightly different way. Obviously, it's very difficult for us to have a single approach to these because, of course, every qualification and every awarding organisation treats these slightly differently. Thank you, Rena, for letting me know. If you can just push on to the next slide for me. Great, thank you. So adapt and delay, not much more I can really say about this other than we're looking at making sure we certainly try to minimise the burden on centres. But you might well expect to see results where the assessments are taken in a slightly different way, and it's very much looking at that balance between validity and flexibility and what's actually possible. So if you would expect to see qualifications coming from more mature students, for example, where they're taking qualifications as part of their ongoing careers and then coming to you at a later date, you might well see there are slight differences in the types of assessments they would have taken. Now, with regards to the results, the majority of results will be out at the same days as GCSEs and A-levels. There may well be some earlier on. Yeah, you can flick over, that's all right, Mary. Thank you. but there are going to be additional assessment opportunities. So again, slightly different to GQ because there's such a wide variety that happens anyway. An awful lot of qualifications are available to take in autumn as a matter of course. It's a standard assessment opportunity. If that's not in place, then many awardee organisations have opportunities in January. And we've asked awardee organisations to consider adding in an extra assessment opportunity where that's proportionate. In some cases, it may not be. So we'd expect to see existing windows being taken up in autumn and in January. There may be additional assessment opportunities, and the students taking those might wish to improve their grades, or again, as with GQ, if they didn't receive a grade in the first place, and that may well have been because their assessments were delayed. With regards to appeals, we actually already have standard appeal arrangements which apply to these qualifications. There is no change fundamentally to these appeal processes, but what we have done is increased our guidance to awarding organisations to ensure that there is a good level of consistency. So as with A-levels, you might want to consider some flexibility for those students who have missed a grade this summer because they've not been able to take their assessment. And it might well be that some of the grades have been missed, and again, take into account the fact that they haven't had that opportunity to sit the assessment and prove what they can do. So I think there are some elements that are very much in common with GQs, and we'd ask for flexibility and consideration of these points. But as with GQs, these qualifications do carry the same currency as previous cohorts. Thank you very much, Mary. I think that's me done.
Thanks, Bethany. So just to round up then, we plan to write to all higher education providers explaining the approach to awarding this year. And we're also going to be publishing a guide for students by the end of July that will set out the process by which their grades have been calculated, arrangements for appeals and complaints, and information about the autumn. So we think that will be helpful this year in particular. So if there's any information in particular that you think it would be useful for us to include in our letter to you or to students, please do tell us via your partnerships team. So we're happy to help. Whatever information you need, just let us know. And as in all years, we're working closely with UCAS to support their comms and guidance.